A poor girl saved a millionaire woman from a car accident on the road. When the woman looked down at the girl's neck, her eyes immediately widened and the rain hammered down in relentless sheets, drumming against the windshield of Kathleen's car with a fury that mirrored the storm brewing inside her. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles pale against the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The world outside blurred into a haze of glistening asphalt and streaks of white and red as her headlights reflected off the slick road. Her phone buzzed faintly in the cup holder. She ignored it. It was likely another voicemail, another investor meeting she couldn't be bothered with. Tonight wasn't about business. Tonight she had driven with no destination, her mind clouded by memories that had clawed their way out from the carefully sealed vault of her grief. 6 years. 6 years since Lucas's untimely death. 6 years since Julia had vanished without a trace, leaving her with an empty home and a hollow ache in her chest. Kathleen glanced at the passenger seat where Julia's favorite stuffed bunny used to ride, back when car rides were filled with giggles and nonsensical chatter. The wipers struggled to keep up with the torrent, squeaking faintly as they swept across the glass. Kathleen blinked back the sting of tears, her vision momentarily blurred. She could almost hear Julia's voice again, soft, sweet, and unguarded. "Look, Mommy, the rain is dancing," Julia had once said, her small hands pressed against the window. The car skidded slightly as her tires hit a patch of standing water. Heart pounding in her throat, Kathleen instinctively adjusted the wheel. Her breath quickened, but the road ahead seemed endless, swallowed by darkness. She shook her head, trying to push the memories aside. "Focus, Kathleen," she muttered under her breath, her voice a shaky whisper against the rain's deafening roar. But then, a blinding flash of lightning lit up the road ahead, illuminating a sharp bend far too close. Kathleen's pulse spiked. She jerked the wheel, but the car hydroplaned, its tires losing their grip entirely. She spun, helpless, as the vehicle veered off the road and collided with a roadside pole. The crunch of metal and the shatter of glass punctuated the chaos. For a brief moment, silence enveloped her, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the crumpled hood. Kathleen stirred, her head throbbing and her vision swimming. She blinked slowly, trying to make sense of the distorted world around her. Her seatbelt cut into her chest, but it had done its job. The air reeked of burnt rubber and gasoline. A shadow moved outside her shattered window. Kathleen flinched, but before she could react, the car door wrenched open. A small, trembling figure leaned into the car, rain soaking through the oversized jacket they wore. "Are you okay?" The voice was small, high-pitched, but steady, even in its urgency. Kathleen squinted. It was a girl, thin, with pale, almost translucent skin streaked with dirt. Her tangled hair clung to her face, drenched and dark under the night's gloom. I think so," Kathleen croaked, her voice hoarse. "Your car's leaking something. You should get out," the girl said matter-of-factly, stepping back to give Kathleen room. Kathleen unbuckled her seatbelt, her hands shaking, and climbed out, leaning heavily on the car for support. Her knees buckled slightly, but the girl moved to steady her, small hands gripping Kathleen's arm with surprising strength. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Kathleen said, her words slow, her mind struggling to catch up with reality. The girl didn't respond immediately. Instead, she shifted nervously, one hand clutching at a chain around her neck. Kathleen's gaze followed the movement, her breath catching in her throat. It was a silver necklace, the pendant a delicate clover. Kathleen's heart thudded against her ribs as her eyes zeroed in on the engraving, faintly visible under the glow of a distant street lamp. "Jay." "Where did you get that?" Kathleen asked sharply, her voice breaking. The girl froze, her grip tightening around the pendant. I've had it for a while, she said cautiously, her eyes darting to the wrecked car as though looking for an escape route. That necklace, Kathleen pressed, her voice rising despite the pounding rain. That belongs to my daughter. The girl stepped back, her expression wary. I don't know what you're talking about, she mumbled. Kathleen knelt to meet the girl's gaze, ignoring the pain radiating through her body. Please, she whispered. Where did you get it? I need to know. The girl hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. She glanced down at the necklace, then back at Kathleen. Finally, she spoke. Will you help me if I tell you? Kathleen's chest tightened. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. Her mind swirled with questions she couldn't yet ask. But one thing was clear. This girl wasn't walking away. I'll help you, Kathleen said, her voice steadier now. But first, you're coming with me. The girl hesitated, but nodded. Kathleen pulled her phone from her coat pocket, dialing her driver with trembling fingers. As the storm raged on, Kathleen watched the frail girl beside her, her mind spinning with unease and a glimmer of impossible hope. The car pulled up to the sprawling estate, its headlights cutting through the misty rain. Kathleen stepped out first, her movements stiff and tentative, the echoes of the crash still lingering in her body. Sarah hesitated by the open door, staring up at the grand mansion that loomed above them, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes in the dark. This is your house? Sarah asked, her voice soft but edged with disbelief. Kathleen glanced at the girl, her lips pressing into a thin line. Yes. Come inside before you catch pneumonia. Sarah followed, her small frame almost swallowed by the oversized jacket she clutched tightly around her. Her sneakers squeaked on the polished marble floor of the foyer as they entered, her wide eyes darting from the gilded chandelier overhead to the grand staircase that curved like a ribbon toward the second floor. It wasn't awe in her expression, more like a quiet, guarded curiosity. Before Kathleen could say anything, the sound of measured footsteps approached from the hall. Rebecca appeared, her impeccable posture and crisp uniform a sharp contrast to the huddled figure of Sarah. You're home late, Rebecca said, her tone warm but distant. Her sharp eyes flicked to Sarah, scanning her disheveled appearance with barely concealed disapproval. And with company, I see. She was at the accident site, Kathleen said shortly, removing her coat. I couldn't leave her there. Rebecca's gaze shifted to Sarah's chest, where the silver clover necklace caught the light. Her expression didn't falter, but her hand twitched slightly at her side, as though resisting the urge to reach for it. What's your name, dear? Rebecca asked, her voice honeyed as she crouched slightly to meet Sarah's height. Sarah, the girl replied, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. Rebecca's lips curled into a small smile, not one of kindness, but something subtler, sharper, as if a private victory had just been won. Welcome, Sarah. It's not often we have visitors. Rebecca, Kathleen interrupted, her tone clipped. Can you prepare a guest room? She'll be staying here for the night. Rebecca rose gracefully. Of course, right away. But before leaving, her eyes lingered on the necklace once more, her smile deepening into something almost predatory. Sarah's gaze followed Rebecca until she disappeared up the stairs. She doesn't like me, Sarah muttered. She doesn't like surprises, Kathleen replied. Her voice softened slightly. Don't take it personally. Sarah shrugged and turned her attention back to the room. The walls were lined with paintings and photographs, most of them carefully curated glimpses of the life Kathleen had lost. One portrait caught Sarah's eye, a young girl with blonde curls and bright blue eyes, her smile radiant. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the frame lightly. Is that her? Sarah asked without turning around. Kathleen didn't need to ask who she meant. "That's Julia," she said quietly. "My daughter." Sarah tilted her head, studying the painting as though trying to place a memory just out of reach. "She looks happy." She was, Kathleen said. The words hung in the air like a weight, unspoken grief pressing between them. Before Kathleen could say more, Rebecca reappeared, her steps as silent as a shadow. "The room is ready," she announced smoothly. Her gaze flicked briefly to Sarah, her smile still firmly in place. "Right this way." Sarah glanced back at Kathleen, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Go ahead." "I'll be right here." Reluctantly, Sarah followed Rebecca up the grand staircase. Rebecca led her to a small but lavishly furnished guest room, the bed draped in soft linens that looked untouched. Sarah lingered by the door, her small frame dwarfed by the opulence. "This is all for me?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Rebecca's smile sharpened. "Of course." Kathleen wouldn't have it any other way. Sarah's fingers unconsciously brushed the necklace at her throat. Rebecca's eyes followed the motion, her gaze calculating. "That's a lovely necklace," she said, her tone casual but probing. "Did Kathleen give it to you?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "I've had it for a long time." Rebecca's smile widened, the expression almost serpentine. "How fortunate. It's very special." She turned toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. "Sleep well, dear." When the door clicked shut, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the engraved J on the pendant. Rebecca's presence unnerved her, yet she couldn't pinpoint the reason. Downstairs, Kathleen poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. She stared at the painting of Julia, her thoughts tangled in a mess of questions. Upstairs, Rebecca lingered in the dimly lit hallway, her lips curling into a dangerous smile. Everything was falling into place. The pieces of her plan were aligning, and Rebecca intended to see it through, no matter the cost. The morning light filtered through the mansion's heavy drapes, cutting faint streaks of gold across the marble floors. Kathleen sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee cradled between her hands. The events of the previous night played on a loop in her mind. The crash, Sarah's fragile form. And most of all, the necklace. That necklace with its tiny engraved J, so unmistakably tied to Julia. The sound of small footsteps broke her reverie. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her hair slightly tousled, her oversized jacket still hanging loosely off her frame. Kathleen motioned toward the counter. "There's cereal and toast. Help yourself," she said. Sarah nodded, keeping her movements quiet and precise, as though afraid of disrupting the pristine space around her. Kathleen studied her for a moment before breaking the silence. "That necklace," she began carefully, her voice low. "You said you've had it for a long time. Where did you find it?" Sarah froze mid-step, her hand hovering near the counter. I don't remember exactly," she replied after a pause, avoiding Kathleen's gaze. "Maybe about a year ago I just found it." "Found it where?" Kathleen pressed, her tone soft but insistent. Sarah fidgeted, her fingers unconsciously brushing the pendant. "In the street, I think. Someone must have dropped it." Kathleen leaned back, her lips pressed into a thin line. The response felt rehearsed, careful. But before she could ask more, Sarah began to hum. A soft, lilting melody. The melody sent a chill down Kathleen's back. It was a lullaby, simple yet achingly familiar. Julia's lullaby. Kathleen's heart thudded as she set her coffee cup down. "Where did you learn that song?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly, her humming stopping abruptly. "What? This?" "I don't know. I just know it." Kathleen stared at her, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. She opened her mouth to speak, but the sound of Rebecca clearing her throat from the doorway made them both turn. Rebecca's eyes darted between them, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Good morning," she said smoothly, her voice cutting through the tension. "I've taken care of the morning arrangements. Will Sarah be staying longer, ma'am?" "For now," Kathleen replied curtly, her focus shifting from Sarah to Rebecca. Something about the housekeeper's presence suddenly felt heavier, sharper. Later that afternoon, Kathleen retreated to her study, hoping for a moment of quiet. Her desk was cluttered with papers, but a large envelope sitting in the center caught her eye. She frowned, flipping it over. The bank's insignia glinted at the corner. Kathleen unfolded the letter and skimmed its contents. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the overdue amounts. Rebecca's name was printed neatly at the top, alongside staggering numbers that painted a picture of debt Kathleen hadn't known existed. They were overdue credit card statements, all tied to Rebecca. Kathleen's brow furrowed as she read through the mounting debts, luxury purchases, unexplained withdrawals, and cash advances. She leaned back in her chair, the envelope still in her hands. Rebecca had worked for her family for years, almost like a member of the household. Yet this was entirely unexpected. Kathleen's first instinct was to confront Rebecca, but something stopped her. Instead, Kathleen reached for her phone. After a brief hesitation, she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Martin," she said, when the line clicked. "It's Kathleen Walker. I need your help." The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Of course, Mrs. Walker. What can I do for you?" Kathleen glanced at the documents again, her fingers gripping them tightly. "I need someone to look into a few things for me. Quietly." By evening, Kathleen had locked herself in the sitting room, her thoughts swirling. The painting of Julia hung prominently on the wall, and Kathleen found her eyes drawn to it, as they often were. Her daughter's bright blue eyes and golden curls seemed to stare back at her, unwavering. But now there was something else. She reached for a photograph sitting on the nearby console, a candid shot of Julia from her 3rd birthday party. Her breath caught as her eyes focused on the small detail she hadn't noticed before. The silver clover necklace resting against Julia's tiny chest. The necklace. It was the same. The same engraving. The same delicate chain. Kathleen sat down heavily, the photo trembling in her hands. The coincidence was too much to ignore. Regardless of Rebecca's difficulties and the secrets Sarah harbored, it became clear that this was no mere coincidence. The pieces were connecting, and Kathleen was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. Kathleen stared at the photograph, her grip tightening as resolve burned in her chest. Something, or someone, had brought Sarah into her life, and she wasn't going to rest until she understood why. The investigator's report arrived earlier than Kathleen had anticipated. She sat in her study, her fingers tracing the embossed edge of the envelope as unease gnawed at her. The study, usually a refuge of order and calm, felt stifling now, every creak of the house heightening her restlessness. She slid a letter opener through the seal and unfolded the first sheet. At the top, Martin's concise handwriting stood out. Initial findings: Rebecca Caldwell and the Fairview Orphanage. Fairview Orphanage. The name alone stirred unease. Kathleen remembered it vaguely, a facility located on the outskirts of town, known more for its revolving staff than the care it provided to its wards. As Kathleen read, her unease deepened. Martin's findings were clear. Rebecca had visited the orphanage multiple times over the past year. The visits coincided with Sarah's arrival at the facility, aligning almost too perfectly with the timeline Sarah had mentioned. Kathleen's eyes darted over the next lines. Rebecca signed in under different pretexts: delivery of donations, volunteer work. The records suggest no formal affiliation. The words felt heavy, each one deepening the suspicion that Rebecca's involvement wasn't charity, but something far more calculated. That evening, Kathleen sat across from Sarah at the dinner table, the silence between them punctuated only by the soft clinking of silverware. Sarah had spent most of the day wandering the mansion, her small frame almost lost in its vastness. Her curious gaze lingered on everything: Julia's childhood photographs, the elaborate furniture, even the dusty piano in the corner of the sitting room. Now, under the warm glow of the chandelier, Kathleen decided to broach the subject gently. "Sarah," she began, setting her fork down carefully, "you mentioned living at an orphanage before." Sarah glanced up, her wide eyes reflecting both trust and hesitation. "Yeah, Fairview," she said softly. "It wasn't too bad." "Do you remember anything unusual there? Someone who stood out?" Kathleen asked, her tone light but probing. Sarah tilted her head, as if sifting through distant memories. "There was Marcus," she said after a pause. "He was nice. He'd tell me stories sometimes, about a mom and her little girl." Kathleen's breath caught. "What kind of stories?" Sarah shrugged, her fork idly poking at her mashed potatoes. "Happy ones, mostly. Like, the mom loved her daughter a lot, and they'd sing songs together. He said they had this big house, kind of like this one." She looked up then, her expression almost apologetic. "It made me feel like maybe one day I could have something like that." The words settled between them, weighty and unspoken. Kathleen swallowed hard, her thoughts spiraling. Marcus knew too much. His stories weren't whimsical. They were specific, intimate. "Did Marcus ever mention Rebecca?" Kathleen asked, careful to keep her voice steady. Sarah frowned slightly, as though trying to recall. "Maybe. I think he said she helped the orphanage sometimes, but I didn't see her much." She hesitated, then added, "There was one time, though. I remember her coming in and talking to Marcus. They were whispering, and when I asked him about it later, he said it wasn't any of my business." Kathleen's grip on her napkin tightened imperceptibly. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, each one sharper and darker than the last. The following morning, Kathleen dialed Martin. "I need more information on Fairview," she said, without preamble. "Especially Marcus, his connection to Rebecca, and why she's been there so often." "Understood," Martin replied, "but I'll need more time." "Take whatever you need," Kathleen said firmly, though her voice betrayed her impatience. As she ended the call, Kathleen's gaze drifted to the photograph of Julia on her desk. The silver necklace gleamed faintly in the light, its clover pendant catching her eye once again. She reached for it, her fingertips brushing the frame as she whispered, almost to herself, "I'll find out what's going on, Julia. I promise." That afternoon, Kathleen decided to visit the room Sarah had been staying in. She found the girl sitting cross-legged on the bed, flipping through a book Kathleen hadn't seen in years. Julia's favorite bedtime story. The sight stirred an ache deep in her chest. "Do you like it?" Kathleen asked, leaning against the doorframe. Sarah looked up, startled, but not afraid. "It's nice," she said simply. "The pictures are pretty." Kathleen stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the shelves. "That used to be Julia's favorite," she said softly. Sarah glanced at the book, then back at Kathleen. "What was she like?" she asked, her voice tentative. "She was curious, like you," Kathleen replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "Always asking questions, always wanting to know more about the world." She paused, her gaze distant. "And she loved that necklace you're wearing." Sarah's hand instinctively went to the pendant. "Do you think it belonged to her?" "I know it did," Kathleen said firmly, and I think you being here isn't a coincidence." The words hung in the air, unspoken truths weaving between them. For the first time, Sarah didn't look away. Instead, she nodded, her small fingers clutching the necklace as though it might anchor her in the storm she now sensed was coming. Kathleen left the room, determination hardening in her chest. The house was eerily quiet when Kathleen decided to act. Rebecca had left for errands in town, her brisk departure marked by the sharp click of her heels across the marble floor. Kathleen watched from her study window, waiting until Rebecca's car disappeared down the long driveway before slipping out into the hall. She moved quickly but cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. Rebecca's room, tucked at the far end of the mansion's second floor, had always been a private domain. Kathleen hesitated for a moment outside the door, her hand hovering over the knob. It felt intrusive, wrong, but the questions swirling in her mind left her no choice. Inside, the room was immaculately tidy, almost sterile. The bed was neatly made, the furniture polished to a gleam. Kathleen scanned the space, her eyes falling on a wardrobe in the corner. She opened it and rifled through the hanging clothes, her fingers brushing against a stack of boxes on the upper shelf. One in particular caught her attention, a wooden box with a brass latch. It was worn, but well kept, as if frequently handled. Kathleen lifted it down and set it carefully on the bed. The latch clicked open with a soft snap, and the lid creaked as she raised it. What she saw inside made her breath hitch. The first thing she noticed was a stack of photographs, each one carefully arranged but unsettling in its contents. There was a wedding photo of Kathleen and Lucas, but her face had been scratched out. The paper torn at the edges as if clawed by something sharp. Another showed their small family portrait, Lucas, Kathleen, and a young Julia. But the image had been torn neatly down the middle, separating Kathleen from her husband and daughter. Beneath the photos was a slim, leather-bound book. Kathleen hesitated, then opened it, the faint scent of old paper wafting up as she flipped to the first page. The handwriting was sharp, almost angry in its precision. Lucas deserves someone who truly loves him, not a woman who can't see beyond her own ambition. He was mine first. He should have been mine forever. Kathleen's heart pounded as she skimmed the entries, each one laced with venom. Rebecca's words painted a picture of obsession, of unrequited love turned sour. The diary chronicled years of resentment, each page cataloguing perceived slights and betrayals, culminating in a single, chilling entry. Kathleen took everything from me. Lucas, the life I deserved. It's time. She feels what it's like to lose. Beneath the diary lay another set of documents, this time less personal, but equally damning. A list of dates and notes scrawled in Rebecca's handwriting, many of them corresponding to her visits to Fairview Orphanage. The final piece was the most damning of all, a letter addressed to Marcus. The contents were brief, but left little room for doubt. Marcus, ensure the girl has the necklace. We need Kathleen to believe. This must go perfectly. I'll handle the rest. Kathleen's stomach turned. The necklace, the stories Sarah had heard at the orphanage. It had all been orchestrated. Rebecca hadn't just played a passive role in Sarah's placement. She had engineered it. She sat back, her hands trembling as she closed the box. The weight of the revelations pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. Rebecca hadn't just resented her. She had actively sought to destroy her life, starting with Julia's disappearance. The implications weighed heavily on her. If Rebecca had been willing to orchestrate something as calculated as kidnapping Julia, what else was she capable of? And what part did Sarah truly play in all of this? Kathleen returned the box to its place, her movements careful despite the anger and fear coursing through her. As she shut the wardrobe door, a faint sound from downstairs caught her attention. Sarah's voice, humming softly. The same lullaby. Kathleen froze, her mind racing. That song was no coincidence. It was an additional element in Rebecca's intricate web, connecting Sarah to Julia's recollections in a manner Kathleen was not yet able to comprehend. When Rebecca returned later that evening, Kathleen was waiting in the sitting room, her expression composed, but her mind a tempest. "Did everything go smoothly?" Rebecca asked, her tone as calm and practiced as ever. "Yes," Kathleen replied, her smile tight. "I spent some time organizing upstairs. This house has so many stories, doesn't it?" Rebecca hesitated, something flickering behind her eyes. "Indeed, it does," she said slowly. "Some of them better left in the past." Kathleen's smile didn't waver. Perhaps, but sometimes the past has a way of catching up, doesn't it? As Kathleen lay in bed that night, everything began to come together. Rebecca's obsession, her orchestrated visits to the orphanage, her instructions to Marcus, everything pointed to one horrifying truth. Rebecca had taken Julia, and now she was using Sarah to dismantle what little remained of Kathleen's life. Determined and furious, Kathleen resolved to confront the woman who had hidden in the shadows for far too long. Kathleen sat with Sarah in the library the next morning, the faint sound of rain pattering against the windows. The room, lined with shelves of untouched books, felt smaller somehow, suffused with the unspoken tension between them. Did this story push your emotions to the peak and bring you to profound moments? If so, leave a comment potato below in the comments section. Sarah was perched on a deep armchair, her legs tucked under her, holding a mug of hot chocolate that seemed oversized in her small hands. Kathleen sat opposite her, her tone intentionally soft. "Sarah," she began, careful to mask her urgency, "can we talk about your time at the orphanage?" Sarah blinked, lowering the mug slightly. "Why?" she asked cautiously. "I'm just curious," Kathleen replied, leaning back to appear relaxed. "You've mentioned it a few times. It sounds like it was an important place for you." Sarah hesitated, but eventually nodded. "It wasn't bad," she said, her voice quiet. "I mean, some of the kids were mean, but Marcus was nice. He made me feel like someone cared." The mention of Marcus made Kathleen's ears prickle. "What was he like?" Sarah's fingers tightened around the mug. "He was, I don't know, serious but kind. He told me stories sometimes before going to bed." Kathleen's chest tightened, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "Did he ever mention a name?" "No," Sarah said after a moment of thought. "But," she glanced down at her necklace, "he looked at this a lot. Like, really looked. He told me it was special, that I should never lose it." "Did he give it to you?" Kathleen asked. Sarah shook her head quickly. "No, I found it. It was just lying on the street one day, outside the orphanage. I picked it up because it was pretty, but when Marcus saw it, he got all weird. Like he knew it." Kathleen's heart pounded. She leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, do you remember anything else about Marcus?" Sarah fidgeted, her gaze darting to the rain-soaked window. "Not really, but—" She paused, her brow furrowing. "The day I got to the orphanage, another girl left. She got adopted. She was so pretty. Blonde hair, blue eyes. She looked happy, though. I think about her sometimes." Kathleen's breath caught. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Her mind raced as she pieced together Sarah's words. The timing, the description, it all fit. Julia. "Sarah," Kathleen said, her voice trembling slightly, "can you remember anything else about that girl?" Sarah tilted her head, her eyes narrowing, as though trying to pluck the memory from the haze of her past. Then her gaze shifted to the wall behind Kathleen, where a photograph of Julia hung in its ornate frame. She looks like her. Julia, Sarah said suddenly, pointing at the picture. The girl who got adopted. Kathleen turned slowly, her eyes locking onto the photo. It was Julia's third birthday portrait, her golden curls catching the light, her blue eyes wide with joy. Kathleen's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Sarah nodded. "Yeah, I think—" Kathleen sat back, the room seeming to close in around her. The pieces were snapping into place with terrifying clarity. Rebecca. Marcus. The necklace. It was all connected, all part of a carefully laid plan that she had only begun to unravel. That evening, Kathleen sat alone in her study, the photograph of Julia clutched tightly in her hands. She replayed Sarah's words over and over, her mind caught between rage and despair. Rebecca's shadow loomed over every piece of the puzzle, her involvement now undeniable. As Kathleen stared at the photo, a memory resurfaced, the frequent absences Rebecca had claimed to handle and the odd deliveries. It all pointed back to the same place, Fairview Orphanage. Kathleen grabbed her phone and dialed Martin's number. He answered on the second ring. "I need to visit the orphanage," Kathleen said without preamble. "Tomorrow." "Understood," Martin replied, his voice calm. "Do you want me to arrange transportation?" "No," Kathleen said. "I'll drive myself." The next morning, as Kathleen prepared to leave, Sarah lingered in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked softly. "Yes," Kathleen replied, her voice steady. "I need to look into something. About the necklace and about you." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, only nodding as she stepped aside. As Kathleen pulled out of the driveway, her resolve hardened. She would go to Fairview, face Marcus if necessary, and uncover the truth. Rebecca's game was unraveling, and Kathleen intended to be the one to bring it to an end. Driving toward the orphanage, Kathleen's grip on the steering wheel tightened as her thoughts churned. Whatever awaited her at Fairview, she knew it would change everything. The Fairview Orphanage was an old, weathered building, its faded brick walls and squeaky iron gates standing in stark contrast to the vibrant, hopeful murals painted along its sides. Kathleen parked her car along the gravel path, her gaze scanning the building with a mix of apprehension and determination. Beside her, Sarah clutched her seatbelt tightly, her small frame stiff with unease. "Are we really going in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kathleen nodded, forcing a reassuring smile. "We are. And you're coming with me." Sarah hesitated, but eventually nodded, unbuckling her seatbelt with trembling fingers. As they approached the entrance, Kathleen's heels clicked against the uneven stones, the sound loud in the quiet surroundings. The front door creaked open before they could knock, revealing a middle-aged woman with kind but tired eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, glancing between Kathleen and Sarah. "I'm Kathleen Walker," Kathleen said, extending her hand. "And you must be Teresa, the manager here." Teresa nodded, shaking Kathleen's hand firmly. "Yes, I am. Please come in." The inside of the orphanage smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood. Children's laughter echoed faintly from another room, but the hallway they entered was quiet. Teresa led them to a small office, her movements brisk but unhurried. "Please have a seat," Teresa said, gesturing to 2 chairs in front of her desk. Kathleen sat, Sarah following hesitantly. The room was cramped, its shelves lined with mismatched binders and folders, all labeled in faded handwriting. Teresa settled into her own chair and folded her hands on the desk. "How can I help you, Mrs. Walker?" Teresa asked, her tone professional but warm. Kathleen hesitated, her fingers brushing against her purse strap. "I'm looking for answers," she said finally. "About my daughter, Julia Walker. She disappeared 6 years ago." Teresa's expression didn't change, but her posture straightened slightly. "I see. And you believe this orphanage might be connected?" "I do," Kathleen said firmly. "I've uncovered enough to suggest that someone here, Marcus, might have had a hand in her disappearance." At the mention of Marcus, Teresa's composed expression faltered. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Marcus worked here for a long time," she admitted. "He was a caretaker, though not officially employed. He volunteered mostly." Kathleen's heart thudded. "And Julia? Did she ever live here?" Teresa hesitated, then stood, moving to a filing cabinet in the corner. She rifled through its contents before pulling out a thin folder. Opening it, she extracted a faded photograph. She placed it on the desk, sliding it toward Kathleen. It was Julia. Her curls were slightly longer, her face thinner, but it was undeniably her. Kathleen felt her throat tighten as she stared at her daughter's image. "She was brought here as a toddler," Teresa said softly. "Marcus claimed he found her wandering alone near the outskirts of town. She didn't say much, and we never located her family. She was with us for a few years." "And now?" Kathleen asked, her voice strained. "Where is she?" Teresa's expression turned regretful. "Julia was adopted about a year ago. A lovely family, kind, stable. They seemed perfect for her." Kathleen's breath caught. Relief and heartbreak warred within her as she processed the words. Julia was alive, safe, loved. But she was also no longer hers. "Do you have their contact information?" Kathleen asked, her voice trembling. Teresa hesitated, then nodded. "We keep records for situations like this. I'll write it down for you." She scribbled on a piece of paper and handed it to Kathleen, who clutched it as though it might vanish at any moment. "I wish we could have done more," Teresa added, "but with the resources we had, we thought adoption was her best chance." Kathleen nodded, unable to speak. Her mind raced with questions and possibilities, but the small, trembling paper in her hand was a lifeline. As Kathleen and Sarah exited the office, a figure lingered in the hallway. Marcus. He was leaning casually against the wall, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, as they followed Kathleen and Sarah's movements. Kathleen tensed, her steps quickening as she guided Sarah toward the front door. She could feel Marcus's gaze burning into her back, but she didn't turn around. Once outside, Kathleen hurried Sarah into the car and locked the doors. Her hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, staring at the orphanage in the rearview mirror. Inside the orphanage, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number. The line connected after a few rings. "She knows," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I saw her with Teresa. They were looking at Julia's file." On the other end of the line, Rebecca's voice was cold and steady. "I'll take care of it." Marcus hesitated. "Kathleen's not going to stop." "Neither will we," Rebecca snapped. "Do as I say." Kathleen drove toward Julia's adoptive home, the paper in her hand crumpling under the pressure of her grip. Her heart pounded with a mixture of hope and fear. But back at the orphanage, Rebecca's calculated plan was already in motion, and Kathleen had no idea how close the danger truly was. Kathleen parked the car in front of a modest suburban home, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the wheel. The neighborhood was serene, lined with well-kept lawns and blooming flower beds. It looked like the kind of place she had once imagined raising Julia, a peaceful, idyllic life. "Is this it?" Sarah asked from the passenger seat, her voice tentative. Kathleen nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She opened the car door and stepped out, feeling the weight of the crumpled paper in her pocket. Every step toward the front door felt heavier than the last. Sarah trailed behind her, her small hand clutching Kathleen's coat for reassurance. The door opened before Kathleen could knock. A man in his mid-30s stood there, his kind eyes scanning her face with quiet curiosity. Behind him, a woman appeared, her arm draped protectively over the shoulders of a blonde-haired girl. The girl's blue eyes widened slightly as she peered at the strangers on her doorstep. "I'm sorry to intrude," Kathleen began, her voice trembling. "My name is Kathleen Walker. I believe your daughter Julia may have once been mine." The man stiffened slightly, exchanging a glance with his wife. The woman tightened her grip on the girl's shoulders, but didn't move away. "Please come in," the man said finally, stepping aside to let them enter. The living room was cozy, filled with family photographs and soft pastel furniture. Kathleen's eyes immediately found Julia's photo among them, her daughter's face smiling back at her from a silver frame. The sight sent a pang through Kathleen's chest, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I'm Daniel," the man introduced himself. "This is my wife, Emily, and this—" he gestured to the girl. "This is Julia." Kathleen knelt slowly, her eyes locking with Julia's. The girl shifted uncomfortably, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "Hi, Julia," Kathleen said softly, her voice breaking. I'm someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." Julia frowned slightly, confusion clouding her expression. "Looking for me? Why?" Emily placed a gentle hand on Julia's shoulder. "Julia, sweetie, why don't you go play in your room for a little while?" Julia hesitated but eventually nodded, glancing one last time at Kathleen before disappearing down the hall. Emily turned back to Kathleen, her expression equal parts sympathetic and guarded. "Please, sit." Kathleen and Sarah sat on the edge of the couch, their movements tentative. Emily and Daniel took the seats opposite them, their demeanor cautious but open. "I don't want to disrupt your lives," Kathleen began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I just needed to know she was safe. For years, I've been searching for her, hoping—" "She's safe," Emily said gently, "and loved. We adopted her about a year ago. She's happy here." The words simultaneously provided comfort and caused pain. Kathleen nodded, blinking back tears. Does she remember anything about her life before?" Emily shook her head. "No. She was so young when she came to the orphanage. We've always told her she was special, that she was chosen to be part of our family, but she doesn't talk about anything from before." Kathleen's gaze dropped to her hands. She had hoped for a glimmer of recognition, a connection, but it was clear Julia had built a new life, one that didn't include her. "I don't want to disrupt her world," Kathleen said finally, "but would it be possible for me to see her, to spend time with her?" Daniel exchanged a glance with Emily. "We'd need to talk to Julia about it," he said carefully. "Her comfort and well-being come first, but we'll consider it." Kathleen nodded, her gratitude evident. "That's all I could ask." As Kathleen and Sarah left the house, her emotions churned in a maelstrom of relief, heartbreak, and determination. Julia was safe, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. She climbed into the car and gripped the steering wheel tightly, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't give up. She couldn't. Back at the mansion, Rebecca stood in Kathleen's study, her eyes scanning the papers strewn across the desk. Her fingers trailed over the photograph of Julia, her expression unreadable. The phone in her hand buzzed, and she answered it quickly. "What's happening?" Marcus's voice came through, tense. "She's met Julia," Rebecca said, her tone icy. "But this changes nothing. If anything, it accelerates our plans." "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "She's not going to stop." Rebecca's lips curled into a cold smile. "Neither will I." Kathleen stared out at the horizon as the car idled in the driveway, her mind swirling with plans to reconnect with Julia. But inside her home, Rebecca's plans to dismantle Kathleen's fragile progress were already in motion. The battle for Julia's future was far from over. Kathleen parked her car in the driveway, her thoughts still spinning from the bittersweet meeting with Julia. The mansion loomed before her, silent and imposing, its grandeur now a stark reminder of the emptiness within. Sarah trailed closely behind, her hand gripping Kathleen's coat tightly, sensing the tension in the air. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the usual distant hum of Rebecca's presence strangely absent. Kathleen's unease deepened as she stepped into the foyer, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. "Rebecca," Kathleen called, her voice uncertain. There was no response. "I don't like this," Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible. Kathleen crouched down, brushing a reassuring hand over Sarah's shoulder. "Stay close to me," she said, her tone firm despite the unease clawing at her. Upstairs, Rebecca stood in Kathleen's study, her hands trembling as she clutched a knife. Her eyes were wild, her carefully crafted facade shattered by the weight of her crumbling plans. The papers strewn across the desk, the photographs, the files, mocked her, each one a reminder of Kathleen's growing advantage. "She's ruining everything," Rebecca thought, her grip tightening around the blade. "Everything I worked for, gone because of her." She heard footsteps approaching and steadied herself, her breath shallow but sharp. When the door creaked open and Kathleen stepped inside, Rebecca's gaze snapped to her, her eyes blazing with hatred. Kathleen froze, her breath catching at the sight of Rebecca and the gleaming knife in her hand. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with caution. Rebecca laughed, a brittle, unhinged sound. "What I should have done years ago," she spat. "You think you've won, don't you? That you can just waltz back into Julia's life, ruin my plans, and leave me with nothing." "Your plans?" Kathleen's voice sharpened. "You mean orchestrating the kidnapping of an innocent child? Manipulating Sarah? What kind of person?" "You don't get to judge me," Rebecca shouted, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "Do you know what it was like to watch you take everything? Lucas, this house, the perfect family. It should have been mine. I loved him, not you." Kathleen's stomach twisted. "Lucas never loved you, Rebecca. And what you've done to my family, what you've done to Sarah, it's unforgivable." Rebecca's expression twisted with fury. "Sarah was just a means to an end, a pawn to make you hesitate, to break you. Once you were out of the way, she'd inherit everything, and I'd control it all." "You were going to kill me," Kathleen said, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a chilling realization. Rebecca stepped closer, the knife gleaming in the dim light. "You should have stayed broken, Kathleen. It would have been easier for everyone." The tension broke like a dam. Rebecca lunged forward, the knife slicing through the air. Kathleen reacted instinctively, stepping back and knocking over a chair in the process. The commotion brought Sarah running to the doorway, her eyes widening in horror at the scene before her. "Sarah, run!" Kathleen shouted, but the girl hesitated, frozen in fear. Rebecca's attention snapped to Sarah, her face twisting into a cruel smile. You're as useless as she is," she snarled, advancing toward the child. "No!" Kathleen shouted, stepping between them. The knife came down, grazing her arm as she pushed Rebecca back with all her strength. The two women struggled, the sound of their movements echoing in the confined space. "Stop it!" Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. Summoning her courage, she rushed forward, pushing Rebecca away from Kathleen. The knife slipped from Rebecca's grasp, but not before grazing Sarah's arm. Kathleen grabbed Sarah and pressed the panic button on the wall, triggering the mansion's alarm system. The The piercing sound filled the house, drowning out Rebecca's screams of rage. Moments later, the front door burst open as neighbors and police officers, alerted by the alarm, stormed inside. Rebecca, disarmed and cornered, sank to her knees, her face a mask of defeat. "She ruined everything," Rebecca muttered, her voice hollow as the officers cuffed her. "Everything." Kathleen held Sarah tightly, ignoring the sting in her own arm, as her attention focused entirely on the terrified girl. "You're safe now," she whispered, rocking Sarah gently. "You're safe." One of the officers approached Kathleen. "We'll need a statement, ma'am," he said, his tone kind but firm. Kathleen nodded, her gaze never leaving Sarah. "Of course. But first, I need to make sure she's okay." As the chaos subsided, Kathleen sat on the couch with Sarah in her lap, her mind swirling with the weight of what had just happened. The betrayal, the danger, it all felt surreal. But one thing was clear. Rebecca's grip on their lives was finally over. Kathleen pressed a kiss to Sarah's head, silently vowing to protect her at all costs. But as the police escorted Rebecca away, her parting words echoed in Kathleen's mind. "You'll never be free of me. Never." The days following Rebecca's arrest were quiet but heavy. The mansion, once cold and hollow, now bore the marks of recent chaos, a shattered vase in the hallway, scratches on the study floor, and the lingering echoes of Rebecca's unhinged rant. Kathleen moved through the house slowly, her arm bandaged but functional, her thoughts preoccupied. Sarah stayed close to her, never straying far, her small frame often curled up on the couch or lingering in doorways. The girl seemed adrift, guilt etched into her features despite Kathleen's constant reassurances. One evening, Kathleen found Sarah sitting in the library, clutching the silver clover necklace tightly. The girl didn't notice Kathleen at first, too lost in her thoughts. "You're going to wear that out if you keep squeezing it like that," Kathleen said gently, stepping inside. Sarah looked up, startled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "For everything. For being part of her plan." Kathleen knelt in front of Sarah, her hands resting lightly on the girl's knees. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said firmly. "None of this was your fault. Rebecca and Marcus used you, Sarah. But that doesn't make you responsible for what she did." Sarah's lip quivered. "But she wanted to hurt you, because of me." Kathleen pulled Sarah into a hug, wrapping her arms around her tightly. "She wanted to hurt me, because of her own hatred and jealousy. You were just caught in the middle. But you saved me, Sarah. You were brave, and I'll always be grateful for that." Sarah sniffled, her grip on the necklace loosening as she leaned into Kathleen's embrace. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she murmured. "You won't be," Kathleen promised. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The adoption process moved swiftly in the wake of Rebecca's arrest, the courts sympathetic to Sarah's situation. Kathleen found herself filling out forms and attending meetings, her resolve growing stronger with each step. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose beyond her grief. Sarah, meanwhile, began to adjust to her new life. The once quiet girl started exploring the mansion with tentative curiosity, her laughter slowly returning as Kathleen encouraged her to find joy in the small things, a shared meal, a story before bed, or a walk in the garden. Kathleen also made regular visits to Julia's home. Emily and Daniel remained cautious but cooperative, their love for Julia evident in every interaction. Julia, however, was hesitant. The 9-year-old observed Kathleen with a mix of curiosity and unease, as if unsure how to place her in her world. On one visit, Kathleen brought an old photo album, its leather cover worn with time. She sat across from Julia at the kitchen table, flipping through the pages slowly. "This was us," Kathleen said softly, pointing to a picture of Julia as a toddler, her blonde curls wild as she held a toy rabbit. "You loved that bunny. You used to carry it everywhere." Julia stared at the photo, her fingers brushing the edges. I don't remember," she admitted, her voice small. "That's okay," Kathleen said, offering a gentle smile. "Memories are tricky things. Sometimes they take time." Emily watched from the doorway, her expression conflicted. When Julia looked up at Kathleen, something flickered in her eyes. A faint recognition, or perhaps a longing she didn't yet understand. As weeks turned into months, the bond between Kathleen and Julia began to grow. It was slow, marked by tentative conversations and shared moments of quiet connection. Julia's adoptive parents supported the process, prioritizing her emotional well-being above all else. One afternoon, as Kathleen sat with Julia in the park, Sarah ran ahead to play on the swings. Julia watched her, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "She's funny," Julia said, breaking the silence. "She is," Kathleen agreed, her heart lifting at the small breakthrough. "She's been through a lot, but she's strong, like you." Julia glanced at Kathleen, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think we can all come here together again?" Kathleen's breath caught, but she nodded. "I'd like that very much." That evening, Kathleen sat in her study, planning a special outing for Sarah and Julia. She wanted to create a moment of unity, something that would begin to bridge the gap between the two girls and solidify the bond they were slowly building. The idea of a picnic in the park came to her, a simple, joyful day filled with games, stories, and laughter. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was a start. Kathleen placed the pen down and smiled softly, imagining Julia and Sarah laughing together under the sun. She closed her eyes and let herself hope, unaware that across town, Rebecca sat in her prison cell, her mind churning with plans for revenge. The bright and clear morning seemed to invite possibilities. Kathleen packed a picnic basket carefully, filling it with sandwiches, fruit, and treats she knew Sarah and Julia would enjoy. Sarah hovered nearby, her excitement barely contained as she peeked into the basket. "Do you think Julia will like this?" Sarah asked, holding up a colorful bag of candies. "I think she'll love it," Kathleen replied, ruffling Sarah's hair gently. "Now go grab your sweater. It's a little chilly." Sarah nodded eagerly and darted out of the kitchen. Kathleen took a deep breath, steadying herself. This outing was more than just a day at the park. It was a chance to mend the broken pieces of her family and offer both girls a sense of belonging. They arrived at the park a little after noon. Julia was already there with Emily and Daniel, sitting on a bench near the playground. Kathleen's heart pounded with joy upon seeing her daughter, her golden curls gleaming in the sunlight. Julia glanced up as they approached, her expression cautious but curious. Kathleen smiled warmly, gesturing toward the picnic blanket she had spread under a large oak tree. "We brought some lunch. Would you like to join us?" Emily gave Julia a gentle nudge, and the girl hesitated before nodding. She stood, her steps slow but deliberate, and sat down on the edge of the blanket. Sarah plopped down beside her, her grin wide as she handed Julia the bag of candies. "These are my favorite," Sarah said, her tone bright. "I thought you might like them too." Julia's lips twitched into a small smile as she accepted the bag. "Thanks." The two girls began talking quietly, their voices mingling with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Kathleen watched them with a mixture of relief and hope, her chest tightening as she saw the faintest hint of a bond forming between them. After lunch, Sarah and Julia ran to the swings, their laughter carrying across the park. Kathleen stayed on the blanket, leaning back against the tree as Emily and Daniel joined her. "She's opening up to you," Emily said softly, her eyes on Julia. "It's slow, but she's curious about you. That's a good sign." Kathleen nodded, her gaze never leaving her daughter. "I know it will take time. I don't want to push her. I just want her to know I'm here." "She'll come around," Daniel said reassuringly. "It's clear how much you care." Kathleen smiled faintly, her gratitude evident. "Thank you for everything, for letting me be part of her life." Emily reached over and squeezed Kathleen's hand. "We're all doing what's best for her, and I think she's starting to see that." As the afternoon wore on, the girls' laughter became more frequent, their initial hesitation melting away. Sarah climbed onto the jungle gym, and Julia followed, her confidence growing with each step. Kathleen watched from a distance, her heart swelling as she saw the two girls playing together, their differences momentarily forgotten. "Look, Kathleen," Sarah called, waving from the top of the jungle gym. Julia stood beside her, mirroring the gesture with a shy but genuine smile. "I see you," Kathleen called back, waving in return. "Be careful up there." The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the park in hues of gold and amber. The girls eventually returned to the blanket, their faces flushed and their hair wind-blown. Kathleen pulled them both into a gentle hug, savoring the rare moment of unity. That evening, after dropping Julia back home, Kathleen and Sarah returned to the mansion. The house felt different now. Not as empty, not as cold. Sarah clutched her necklace as she climbed into bed, her eyes heavy with sleep, but her expression peaceful. "Did you have fun today?" Kathleen asked, tucking the blanket around her. Sarah nodded. "It was the best day ever. Do you think Julia likes me?" "I think she does," Kathleen said, brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's face. "And I think she'll like you even more the next time." Sarah smiled, her eyes fluttering shut. "I hope so." Kathleen sat with her for a while, the quiet hum of the house settling around them. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, a fragile but growing hope that their fractured family could heal. The next morning, Kathleen's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Martin. "Kathleen, I wanted to let you know. Rebecca and Marcus have been sentenced. They won't be able to hurt you or anyone else again." Kathleen exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Martin." As she hung up, Kathleen turned toward the window, where sunlight streamed in, bathing the room in warmth. Outside, Sarah played in the garden, her laughter drifting through the open window. Kathleen smiled, her resolve strengthening. A few weeks later, Kathleen planned another outing with Sarah and Julia, this time to the beach. The girls splashed in the waves and built sand castles together, their laughter mingling with the sound of the ocean. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the horizon, Kathleen watched her daughters playing, her heart full of hope. Their journey was far from over, but in that moment, Kathleen knew they were on the path to healing, a future brighter and filled with love. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.